being the first week after Shavuot, we begin the study of the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, again. So we studied from chapter 3 and on. So today we're back to chapter 1, which actually in this group we didn't have a chance to study yet. So we're in good position to learn something new. And one of the very interesting and very applicable Mishnahs or passages in this chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot is right here in front of us. Let me bring that up. And here we go. Yoshua ben Prachia Omer, Yeshua the son of Prachia would say, make yourself a teacher, acquire yourself a friend, and judge every person to the side of merit. So, 3 teachings here. Make yourself a teacher, have someone to teach you and guide you, acquire a friend, and judge every person to the side of merit. Look at each person favorably to the side of merit. So these 3 teachings are really 3 relationships or 3 ways of viewing different people. And there are also relationships that are different in the level of interaction, or in other words, in the position that I am, that the person in the center is at in the relationship. You have an upwards relationship where we look at a teacher, make yourself a teacher. You have a lateral relationship, an equal relationship where you look at a friend on the same situation and level as yourself. And then there is looking down, but trying not to look down, but judge every person to the side of merit, see the good and the positive within every person, and understand their circumstance. So these are three different statements, really, 3 different life teachings that work together for having a teacher, having a friend, and judging people favorably. And we're going to have to go through them and understand them all, particularly to understand the difference in terminology. Because here we say, aseh l'charav, make yourself a teacher, which is an interesting way to say to get a teacher. Acquire yourself a friend, which is again an interesting way to say to get a friend. And finally, judge every person to the side of merit, an altogether different term, not about making or getting something, but the way we look at another person. So here we are. We'll go through this one by one. Why is it so important to have a mentor? Why is it so important to have a teacher? Make yourself a teacher. I mean, can't we study and discover on our own? There are so many books. There's so much wisdom available. There's so much that we can look for and find without a teacher. And that's always been that way. And today that's exploded. I mean, you can go online, you can find a tutorial for just about anything, plus a little more, everything that's useful and a lot of what's not, and learn. You don't actually seem to need a teacher or need a mentor.
I disagree.
And so why don't you tell us why don't you give us our answer? Why do we need a teacher?
Wait, my aunt.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. Well, it's very simple. If you want to learn a skill, you could read books, you could do many things, but if you find a master teacher, you will cut through so much. You would learn so much quicker, because I think there's a difference between just a teacher and someone who's a master at teaching. And because the master can make distinctions that another teacher possibly can't. And to learn how to climb a mountain, you could read books about it, but if you go to a master, they're going to teach you the right, proper way to do it in the most efficient way. And then it's up to you to do whatever you have to do.
So if I understand you correctly, We're saying, yes, you can learn lots of things on your own, but there's nothing like getting it from a teacher who's a true master. So
Right.
get a teacher and make sure you get somebody good.
So,
Yes.
Rabbi Shalom, can I comment?
Sure.
Yeah, it's so ironic that we're doing this. I studied today with Rabbi Ari Pirkei Avot, and we were talking about a related subject. And what he said, a question I asked was, why does it seem like there's so many sages, wise men, back in the day, thousands of years ago, and today it appears like there's less so. Of course, we were blessed with the Rebbe, but okay, that's one tzaddik. But it seems like back then there were many. And he made a comment about, maybe it's a Hasidic thing. Today we're midgets, but we're midgets on mountains, meaning there's been so many thousands of years of learning that we benefit from that. So the point being, back to the teacher, how do we benefit from a teacher? Well, a teacher is like the mountain. The teacher has a mountain of knowledge, and we learn as a result from that. Or even just a friend, you're building on one another. You're building on one another's knowledge to elevate each other.
That's great. That's great. And so you saved me a lot of trouble between Alan and David in clarifying the need for a teacher. But I'm going to stress one more point, and that is the term that the Mishnah uses, asela charav, make for yourself a rav, which we might translate as rabbi, but actually rav means a master. Make for yourself somebody who you will listen to, who will guide you. In other words, part of the benefit of having a teacher or a mentor or a guide is because we can learn and we can understand and we can appreciate, but we remain biased. We cannot be immune to self-interest. And really, when we use our intellect, we use our brains, and we try to see something objectively and then follow through on it, we try. But inevitably, by the human nature, our emotions and our desires and our personal tendencies and even personal biases color and impact the things that we see, the things that we understand, and the conclusions we reach. Yeah. So we need to have the teacher, we need to have the mentor to help us see the full picture, to help us see the objective picture, especially when we talk about something that's relevant for application to ourselves in our own lives. In other words, it's not only about the learning, but it's about the learning when it hits home and when it means me and when it might be inconvenient for me, something that the objective truth calls for. And I might find harnessing a good intellect, heavily colored by my emotional desire, I might find lots of good excuses. And the mentor will be the one to say, no, let's look at this the way it really is. Let's get back to the objective picture. Or as the Talmud says, Adam karev etz la'atzmai, a person loves him or herself and cannot see where he or she is making a mistake in their own judgment. Whereas a mentor, a judge can be the judge to do that for you.
Yeah.
This reminds us of a Talmudic story, which shows us just how far and how subtle a bias can be and how careful we have to be about it. So if we look here, we will see the story. This is from the Talmud. A man once brought a gift of first fleece to Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. So the first fleece is one of the many things that the Jewish people would give the Kohanim, the priests who served in the temple. They would support them by means of these various agricultural gifts. Well, this particular gift is the first shearing. So if you have sheep or other wool-bearing animals, that you shear them once a year or whenever it is that you cut off the wool and you have the product, you give the first cut of that to the Kohen as a gift. So a man bought a gift of first fleece to Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, who was a Kohen. Rabbi Shmuel asked him, was there no coin to him to give it between where you came from and here? Apparently, the man was not the next door neighbor. And Rabbi Shmuel says, you came all the way to me to give me the Kohen's gift. There are lots of Kohanim out there. Why did you come here? The man replied, I have a legal issue with someone. So I thought that since I'll be seeing you in any case, because he was the judge, I'll bring it to you. Rabbi Shmuel said to him, I am disqualified from hearing your case. If you chose me as the Kohen instead of another Kohen, I cannot hear your case. That would make me, partial to you by getting that kind of gift. And he recused himself. He also refused to accept the gift from him. Rabbi Shmuel appointed 2 other rabbis to judge the case. As the person was presenting his arguments, and Rabbi Shmuel was just kind of listening in, Rabbi Shmuel found himself thinking, if you would argue this point this way and emphasize that point the other way, he would have a better case. So he found his brain operating and saying, hey, you can do this, you can do that. Of course, he's thinking this in his mind and keeping it to himself. And suddenly he came to a realization. And so subsequently, Rabbi Shmuel said, see how corrupting a bribe is? I didn't even accept the gift from him. And even if I had, it would have been something to which I am entitled by law. Nevertheless, I was inclined in this person's favor just because that gesture that he made to me of choosing me to be the Kohen to receive the wool instead of another Kohen, which really was not a gift at all because he was obligated to give it to some Kohen, and I never even accepted the gift, and I'm not ruling on the case, but I see that my brain is naturally gravitating towards finding solutions for him. Nevertheless, I was inclined in this person's favor. How much more so one who accepts a bribe? This demonstrates how subtle a bribe could be in Jewish understanding and in Jewish law, and how subtle a self-interest can be, and so much so that we would often not notice it. So Rabbi Shmuel was able to notice it. Rabbi Shmuel was on alert, and he didn't accept the gift, nor did he rule on the case, and he still found himself thinking in that person's favor. So when we look at ourselves and we try to apply the Torah's teachings to our own lives and do the right thing each and every day, if we lack that teacher, that mentor, we reach our own conclusions, which not because of any negative intent, but just by our nature, are influenced by our personal biases and what's convenient for us. And we often don't reach the right conclusion. And this takes us back to the term asay, make for yourself a rabbi, make for yourself a teacher. It doesn't just say, find a great teacher, find a great mentor, but make yourself a teacher. The term asay, when you say make something, particularly in Hebrew, is a term which implies coercion. It implies forcing yourself. You make something when it's unnatural. You take a natural piece of wood and you might make it into a table. You're going to force it using an axe or a hammer to become something else. You're going to change it. You make it be what it wouldn't naturally be. And that means that we have to choose our mentor and we have to make that choice, but it's a difficult choice to make. And it takes a degree of humility and respecting somebody else and being willing to accept that the guidance from another person, that objectivity can help me, and pushing myself, forcing myself to go ahead and do that and accept that kind of guidance and even authority, even though it sometimes is not a lot of fun and sometimes gets difficult. So the term used here specifically is not just make sure to have a teacher, but asay l'charav, make for yourself a mentor, because that is usually requires that degree of personal pressure, shall we call it.
So Rabbi,
yes?
Rabbi, does this mean, I mean, like, I'm tracking with you. It's like the student has to work at it. The student has to, work to adapt themselves to the teacher, to be willing to be open to accepting what the teacher is saying. Is Is that accurate? Is that in the same realm?
That would be a similar point where that also takes humility to listen instead of drawing conclusions as the teacher is talking, to listen and take what he is saying and process that before turning on my own analysis. But we're also talking about in the context of accepting authority and guidance on decision making and on reaching conclusions and application of what we study and ensuring that that's objective. That sometimes that takes some personal force. You got to force yourself to do that because I'd like to do things my own way and not ask the mentor. So there's a degree of assay there of pushing myself in the right direction. All right, the next thing we read about was Knei lecha chaver. Acquire for yourself a friend. Acquire a friend. Of course, friendship, having a peer, having a colleague, having companions is important, even critical. As people, we live that way. We live among and in connection to and association with other people. Although some people are more introverted and some others are more extroverted, overall, everybody needs to have that kind of human interaction, companion. Especially right now, there's been a lot of distancing. We can see how much that's been a major part of life, that being with other people, that having that friend. But Rabbi Chanina said in the Talmud something interesting in the area of Torah study. He says, I've learned a lot from my teachers. I've had great teachers, great sages, tzaddikim, as David mentioned earlier in those times. And I've learned a lot from them. But I've learned even more from my colleagues. By studying together, by working together, we've learned a lot, we've grown, and I've learned even more from that process and that relationship with these good friends than from my teachers directly. I remember there was a fellow in the yeshiva used to say, and I never found this in a book, but he said it's old Hasidic saying, that in the forest, there are no crooked trees. Now, if you walk down the street, then there's like a tree-lined street. You'll have some straight trees, and some trees will be less straight, depending on, if they paid attention to it when it was young. Not every tree will grow perfectly straight. But somehow in the woods, there seems to be, at least, maybe if you look closely, you'll find them, but if you look just in a global picture, you kind of drive through the woods, it looks like all the trees are nice and parallel and straight. And the Hasidic saying is that the trees in the woods, they straighten each other out. There's so many of them packed together, they push each other. One of them gets a little out of line, they straighten each other out. Whereas a tree on the boulevard is alone, and if it's crooked, it just stays crooked. So it's important to have friends and a colleague and work through things together so that we straighten each other out. And when we kind of step out of line, we get a little nudged back in. That helps in that way. The second Rebbe actually said something interesting and somewhat confusing in this term of having a colleague and a friend, where he said that when two Jews meet up and they discuss the Torah together and they discuss their efforts to be better people together and they support each other in that effort, well, then it's two divine souls teaming up against one animal soul. So if we take the Hasidic understanding that every person is comprised of a divine soul, a spark of God, a higher and greater sense of purpose and connection, as well as a more animalistic soul, which is just our basic life and our natural and sometimes petty instincts and interests. And it's a constant struggle between what's easy and what's right, and what's comfortable or fun, and what's the higher road. And that's a struggle within me between my divine soul and my animal soul. But when I meet up with a fellow Jew and we work together, we support each other, we have two divine souls against one animal soul. Now, of course, the mathematics of that is a bit confusing. to say the least. How can if each one of us has a divine soul and an animal soul, and now there are two of us, well, there should be two of each. How did one animal soul get left behind? So the saying goes that the two animal souls, they don't team up. Divine souls, they share a common purpose, they share a common mission, they share a common sense of godliness, and when they meet each other, they support each other. Whereas the animal soul shares only ego with its friend. They each have their own ego and their own self-interest that they're looking out for. So when the two animal souls meet, they actually butt heads. They don't help each other out. They rub each other the wrong way. So the two divine souls are naturally working together, and each individual is supporting the other in his quest to be a better person, and they can each together team up two against one and tackle one at a time, two divine souls versus one animal soul. So in other words, partnering with another person and that friendship and support of a colleague can actually be not only double myself, not only if I have a colleague who's more or less equivalent to me, he brings an equivalent amount of resources and capabilities to the table, but actually when we're together, we can do more than what when each of us can do, more than twice of what each of us can do separately. The sum total of the joint effort is more than twice the individual effort. The Talmud describes this with carrying heavy loads. If a person will pick up a heavy load and try to get it onto his shoulder and try to carry it down the road, there's a certain limit how much you can lift the weight and reach. But if somebody else helps you and helps you raise that onto your shoulder, you can carry an estimated 3 times the amount.
Is she with you?
In other words,
Yeah.
on your own, you can do up to this point. The second person is not doubling that. By him lifting it onto my shoulder, we actually increase that number more than twice. The two of us together can get more value for the money, more than twice each of us separately. So this getting the friend, having that true friend is really a critical support that we each need in our own lives and in our own quests to become a better person and a better Jew. But the term, again, we talked about the term last time. What's the term used here? The term is acquire yourself a friend. Acquire. It almost sounds like you got to go shopping for it. And you have to pay to acquire that friend. You don't just meet the friend or get the friend. Now, of course, it's a bad idea to bribe your way to friendship. And kids do this sometimes when they feel lonely. They try to give their classmates or whoever it is, give him something so they should like him and be in the center of attention. But it's actually not a very good social idea to make friends by buying them and kind of bribing them to like you. But acquiring a friend in the sense of that cost, means that sometimes it takes a sacrifice to have a true friend. Having that true friend requires not only vulnerability on my part, but actually sometimes doing things the other person's way. Actually sometimes doing things for the other person's benefit at cost to myself. Any relationship is going to require personal cost and sacrifice to develop the trust and to support the other person. So the Mishnah says, buy that friend. A true and positive friendship is worth the cost. Buy it, acquire it, invest in it, even if it costs your own ease or convenience or comfort or whatever it might be. So we talked about 2 relationships so far, about a relationship with a teacher and a relationship with an equal, a colleague, a friend, and why each of them are important. What happens when we're not looking equally or upwards, but looking down? Well, the Mishnah tells us we shouldn't ever look down, because judge every person to the side of merit. When you look at that other person, we have to judge them to the side of merit, judge them favorably, assuming that every situation and every circumstance and every choice that a person makes can be interpreted positively or negatively. And if someone is doing something that seems to be very negative, there can be a possible explanation and understanding in a bigger picture why they're doing that or what's causing them to do that terrible thing, which would change our view of it. So when we see somebody doing what might be wrong, when we see somebody doing what looks like a very bad choice, of course, we should try to help them out of it. But from a perspective of just viewing that and internally judging that, we should always judge that positively and say, you don't know what that individual is going through or what might be behind this. There's a classic story or a little incident that is said to have occurred on the subway in New York City. And I have never checked it out. I can't verify the story. Many of you may have heard it, but it's a powerful expression of this, where there's a bunch of travelers on the subway at the end of a workday, and they're kind of trying to get a little peace until they get wherever they have to go. And at some stop, a fellow gets in with a bunch of little kids, and these kids are really aggressive and really loud and really unfriendly and even rude to the people in the car, and they're running into people and taking up more space than they should and throwing things around and calling out to each other and really disturbing the peace in quite an aggressive way. The father just seems lost in the midst of it all, until finally one of the annoyed and disturbed travelers says, why don't you try to restrain your kids a little bit? This is really unpleasant. And the father just apologizes and he says, they're coming now from the hospital and their mother, his wife, just died. They're coming from her deathbed. They don't know what to think or do. And I don't know what to think or do or to tell them. So I'm just very sorry that this is how it's playing out. Once the people heard that, obviously their perspective shifted 180 degrees, and they're each begging those children, as it were, to jump on them and take advantage of them and trying to feel for those children and be that support at this kind of impossible time. What happened is the noise they're making and the ruckus and the ball playing or whatever it might be less disturbing, less inconvenient? No. But the perspective, understanding the other person, being able to judge them favorably, changed the entire understanding of what's going on. So every time we see somebody doing what seems to be wrong, and probably may actually be objectively wrong, we should always be judging them favorably. Now, this is a very bad idea when we look at ourselves. When I make a mistake, if I'm going to be judging myself favorably and saying maybe I made that mistake because of X, Y, or Z and it's not my fault, and let myself off the hook, well, then I can never grow. Possibly the biggest obstacle to improvement and to growth is to give excuses, to justify yourself, to constantly find a reason to say it wasn't my fault or it isn't really a problem. That is said to be a major component of the sin of Adam and Eve, of Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden. Not only they ate the fruit that God said not to, but when God demanded an accounting, he says, what's going on? Adam said, she did it, and she said, the serpent did it. They each had an excuse. They didn't own up to the problem. They weren't accountable for their actions. So when it comes to ourselves, we need to judge ourselves not so favorably and help ourselves improve. And that's kind of what we were talking about before, where we tend to see ourselves always in a very positive light and overly positive and sometimes be biased in our own direction. But the lesson of the Mishnah was have a mentor who can help you see the objective picture and not get lost in that self-love. But when it comes to another person, This is where we have to judge them favorably. It's not for us to take responsibility for their accounting and their accountability and growth, but to judge them favorably and see the positive side, try to understand their situation and what might be here beneath the surface.
So, Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So we should judge others favorably, but I think I'm quoting from the Tanya. We should view ourselves always as a Rasha, and that as a result of doing that, it gives us an incentive to try to do better, to try to grow, try to learn.
Right. Well, the Tanya also questions that and says if you view yourself as a Rasha, as a wicked person all the time, you're going to be depressed.
Right.
Which is why Tanya ultimately reaches the conclusion that you should only view yourself as a Rasha-like. You should only view yourself as somebody who struggles to not be a Rasha. Because you have a relationship with being a Rasha. It's within you, and you have to constantly overcome it.
My other question now, or we
Sorry?
can answer it later, of course. Why are these three groupings together in this particular Mishnah?
Well, that's a very interesting question, which I haven't looked into this cycle around to see, how we balance those. But apparently, there's some degree of equal importance. We all understand we need a mentor, but some of us may be less inclined to pursue friendship and a colleague. We may be humble before a great leader or a great teacher, but for everyone else, we're too busy with ourselves to accept in our lives. So we need to understand that both are important, and it could be vice versa. And finally, this way we relate to people who may be of lesser stature than ourselves and seeing them favorably also has equal importance to relating positively with others and accepting leadership from a teacher. So maybe one of the reasons they're coming together is because they are to be seen equally. Another thing to keep in mind is just technical, but Pirkei Avot, especially in the beginning, is designed as quotes. So we quote the particular rabbi in a bunch of teachings that he had said, in ethical or life matters of like the ways of life. And even if they're not necessarily intrinsically related, we just quote them by their author and then move on to the next author. So that's definitely a possibility here that these were just Rabbi Yeshua's statements and we say them and then we quote somebody else's statements. But it would seem to be, especially the way the sentence is set up, that there is a relationship, and maybe part of that relationship is to attach significance to each of these levels of interaction with others, even though we each tend to have our own tendencies. What do we consider more important and what do we consider less? We should cover them all.
Oh, good. Thanks.
And finally, just coming from this thinking that a person has to do the reverse here, kind of. And instead of seeing himself with self-love and giving excuses for himself, we should see the other person with love and give excuses, as it were, for them. This is how we explain what you might call the golden rule. But in the Talmud, when the Talmud famously says that the entire Torah, the principle of the Torah, is that what you don't wish to be done to you, don't do unto others, says that in a negative terminology. It says, don't do unto others what you don't wish to be done to you. Shouldn't it have said, do to others what you wish to be done to you? As the Torah says, love your fellow as yourself, in a positive terminology of the same message. But one explanation given for that by the third Rebbe is that there's something that people really hate. Don't do to others what you don't wish done to you. There's this one particular thing that almost everybody doesn't want to be done to them, and that is to be shown their faults. We look at our faults, we see them all the time, but we've got books full of excuses for them. We don't want anybody else to show us our faults, because when they show the fault, it doesn't come with the excuse. And this is where the Talmud says, what you don't wish to be done to you, that's what you shouldn't do to another. When you look at another, don't see the faults. See the positive side, see the possible excuse, see the justification as you have been doing for yourself. Don't do this very provocative or thing that you would never accept be done to you, to be shown your faults. Don't see somebody else's faults, instead see the positive. In other words, this is a greater expression of our love for another person and treating them properly, that to the degree of self-love, we love ourselves so much that we can't see our faults. Our bias covers over them. Well, it's time to love somebody else to the point of not being able to see their faults, to find always the understanding and the empathy for them in whatever situation they may be in. To conclude with a story, an anecdote of the Rebbe on the idea of friendship. Somebody had the, shall we say, the chutzpah or the boldness to ask the Rebbe personally in a yechidus, in a private audience, what the Rebbe is, what is the Rebbe's job, how does the Rebbe see himself? And the Rebbe said, I try to be a good friend. A good friend. The fellow says, is that all? I've got lots of good friends. We go out every night. What is it? A Rebbe is just about being a good friend? And the Rebbe says, well, to which of your good friends can you share whatever's on your heart? To which of your good friends are you not embarrassed to say whatever it might be that's going on, whatever it might be that you're struggling with, whatever it is that's in your life, because you know the friendship and support is so solid, they will not be impacted by what you might be sharing. A true good friend is somebody who you can be totally open to and totally bare yourself, and he or she is still there to support you. And that's what the Rebbe is trying to do, to hear people out of the deepest parts of their experience and their situation, and be that good friend to support them. And here's where the fellow said, well, I'm not sure I have any good friends at all, if that's what it means. So when we seek a friendship, we should be seeking that kind of deep friendship. And it's strange to call the Rebbe a friend, but it's at that level where we say, in front of a Rebbe, we can open up, share whatever it is, and know that we'll be supported from there and be able to grow from there. This concludes our class for tonight. Tomorrow, it's Tuesday, as usual, we have the Parsha class. It's on the other Zoom link, so text me for that if you'd like to join. Wednesday will be the women's class, and finally, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused again between Monday class and Thursday class. Yes, you see, that's what people say, that in the current situation, nobody knows the day of the week. So,
Right.
being today's Thursday, tomorrow we will not have a class because tomorrow will be Shabbos. And our next class will be on Monday. And being that we've finished the Positivity Bias series, I'll have to let you all know what our topic will be for Monday. I'm sure we'll find something that's interesting enough to keep me busy pulling it together. Any questions, comments so far?
So Rabbi, next Thursday, do you expect to tackle Pirkei Avot again?
Yeah, we have chapter 2 for next Thursday, yes. And then we'll have to mutually decide if we want to do another cycle. That will complete our round because we started at chapter 3.